So, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us, both on-site and online, for tonight's membership lecture. I am Elisa Albini, and I am a member of the France Advisory Council here at the British Museum. I know you are all very eager to be transported to ancient Rome by the great Paul Roberts, but before we start the journey through space and time, I just need to run through some housekeeping. First, in the hopefully unlikely event of an evacuation, please follow the green evacuation signs and exit at the back 2 corners and on either side of the stage. If anyone needs any additional support, please identify yourself to a member of staff and they will be able to help you. For those watching at home, please use the chat facility if you have any issue, and a colleague will be able to help you. Remember that you can also ask questions using the Q&A button on Zoom. Now, as Paul's extraordinary guided tour is fast approaching, I am sure you can feel ancient Rome starting to come closer. And although I've traveled to the city many times, before reading Paul's amazing book, I had never fully realized how close ancient Rome actually is. For example, it is quite common, when in Rome, to find oneself waiting for a bus or a tram in bustling Largo Argentina. And yet, thanks to Paul, one discovers that a part of our daily commute involves standing close to the site where Julius Caesar was assassinated on the famous Ides of March 44 BC. Or, it is common knowledge that the Tiber Island hosts a hospital today. And yet, it is fascinating to discover that the island has been associated with health since the 290s BC. Or one can find oneself in the beautiful church of Santa Maria degli Angeli, maybe looking for peace, or maybe looking for shelter from Rome's scorching summer heat. And yet it is mind-blowing to realize that we are standing in the cold room, the frigidarium of the baths of Diocletian, the largest in the empire. Some, or perhaps all of you, may have heard of a theory which seeks to explain the paradoxes of quantum physics. For example, that light behaves as a wave, but also as a particle, by posturing that there are many parallel and non-interacting worlds. It is called the many worlds interpretation. Well, Paul's book has shown me that there is at least one place in the world where many worlds not only coexist in parallel, but also amazingly interact with each other. And without further ado, please join me in a round of applause to welcome Paul.
Thank you very much, Elisa, and may I say what a great joy and privilege it is to be back home in the British Museum. It's the best museum in the world. And Rome, the very name Rome, has a power, has a magic. Here, the wonderful bird's eye view of Rome by Alan Sorrell. The Ashmolean recently acquired the Sorrell archive. And viewing it as it was in about 270 AD. If you'd viewed it 200 years earlier, it wouldn't have looked like that. 100 years earlier wouldn't have looked the same again. Rome is constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. We know about Rome, don't we? It's eternal. All roads lead to it, and it wasn't built in a day. We know Rome. And it certainly wasn't built in a day. It took centuries, evolving through natural disasters, through technological changes, societal changes, political changes, and of course the emperors, the people who built the city. Because conspicuous power and display was everything in Rome. And what better way than showing your wealth and power than by building monuments? And indeed, the word monument comes from monere, which is to caution or to remind. And when you have a monument, of course, it's functional. It might be a bath or a theatre or a temple. So it has a function, but it also beautifies the city. And very importantly, it glorifies the person who built it. And this is one of the major drives for building the monuments in Rome. There's no such thing as just another theatre or just another temple. They've all got a focus and a purpose. And we'll look then at Rome's history through these monuments and the people that built the monuments to see the history, to see the changes, and to see the impact that these monuments made. Now, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was that book, which you're all dying to get your hands on, I know. The book took 24 years. 24 years. It started off as a 10-page pamphlet to accompany a British Museum tour to Rome. And then 2 years later, a Roberts family tour to Rome. And my late sister Sheila said, Paul, you should make a book out of it. And one of my sisters, Anne, said, yes, and I'll type it up for you. So each year I took the latest version, scribbled all over it in my appalling handwriting, and Anne typed it up. So that's how it started. Then a wonderful man from Thames and Hudson called Colin Riddler had faith in the book, and he said, we can turn this into a book. It's going to be great. And he passed on the baton to a wonderful team just up the road. Oh, sorry. Wonderful team just up the road. And Ben Hayes, Emma Barton, and India Knight, they were the ones who really helped make the book what it is. It's not a guide. There's only 50 monuments in it. But what it seeks to do is to look at the reasons for these monuments, to look at the impact they had. What impact did they have at the time and later on? How did they end up looking as they do? So a book to be read perhaps before or after you go to Rome, rather than as you are traipsing around the Colosseum or the Forum. There's Amanda Claridge and Filippo Corelli if you want to do that. And this book, I've done the thanks, but the dedication has to be to this wonderful man here. This is Ralph Jackson, who was a good friend, a great mentor in the Roman Britain section of the museum, who sadly left us very recently. But there he is with the copy of the Ribchester helmet that he was given at his retirement in 2016. A wonderful, wonderful man. So the book is dedicated, the lecture's dedicated to him. Now, Rome began with another important city, Troy. Here is Bernini's sculpture now in the Villa Borghese, showing Prince Aeneas leaving Troy with his father on his shoulders, Anchises, and his young son Iulus, or Ascanius, by his feet. Iulus is the man to whom the Julian clan, Julius Caesar, took their mythological origins. And by the way, Aeneas's mother was Venus. So a nice bit of divine pedigree there. Now, it isn't Aeneas who founds the city of Rome. It's two of his descendants who you probably recognize, Romulus and Remus, being suckled by the she-wolf there, marvellous bronze in the Capitoline museums. And it is Romulus and Remus. Romulus kills Remus and becomes the first king of Rome. 753 BC, 21st of April to be precise. 753 BC, the beginning of what we can call the regal period, partly in legend, partly in history. 7 kings, finishing in around 509 BC, the regal period. In this period, Rome comes together, agglomerates as a city. There are important monuments, such as the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, built by the last king, but dedicated under the Republic that followed. But also mundane things, but important things, such as the Cloaca Maxima, the main drain of Rome, which wasn't primarily a sewer, it was a drain. The purpose of it was to drain the low-lying areas of Rome that lie between its hills, so that Rome could come together as a city. So you have Rome coming together as a city, and then in the rest of the Republic, some 500 years, you have Rome's expansion, way beyond the city, into Italy, and then into the Mediterranean as a whole. And the Republic is the period in which this great expansion takes place, such that by the time the end of the Republic comes, you already have, in effect, a Roman Empire. You don't have an emperor yet, but you have an empire. And this is one of the ceilings in the Capitoline museums. SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romanos, the Senate and the Roman people. These are who call the shots, except they don't always call the shots. You have no single ruler, which can be a strength and can be a weakness, as we shall see. But it's in this period that Rome conquers Italy and then the Mediterranean. And huge change. Huge wealth coming into Rome, huge wealth. The city of Taranto in Puglia, the heel of Italy, when that's conquered by the Romans, they bring back 89,000 pounds in weight of gold to the city of Rome. 200 million pounds worth of gold. And Taranto's far from the only city that gets attacked by the Romans and conquered. So you have this massive influx of wealth, but also of know-how. You have skilled artisans, sculptors, potters, cooks, all flooding into the Roman world. You have a transformation of Roman society. Rome is no longer Roman, it is Greco-Roman. And you start to see it in the monuments of Rome. Now, the Republican rulers are building their monuments, often in response to a war or a plague or a natural phenomenon. This is an interesting monument in the Forum Boarium, an area in the south of the city, where you have this intact temple. It's unusual because it's marble. Now, why is that unusual? Because it dates to about 150 BC. And at this time, Rome, as far as we know, had only 2 or 3 marble temples. Any Greek city worth its salt, with more than 3,000 or 4,000 people, would have marble temples akimbo by this time. Rome doesn't. It's this Greco-Roman influence that changes Rome. And by the way, that temple almost certainly arrived flat pack. It was built almost certainly by Greek craftsmen using Greek marble, which came in ready cut. And it's quite common in the Roman period, in the Republican period, to have groups of temples. They seem to huddle together. This is Lago Argentina. And Elisa's already told you one of the secrets of Lago Argentina, so it's not a secret anymore, but look at the bus. Yeah, forget what Lisa said. The bus, think of the bus stop because you may need it later. These are all temples which began in the Republican period, Lago Argentina, quite near the Pantheon in Rome. And Roman culture is transformed. Mosaics, frescoes, fine sculpture, Venus and Mars. Venus, the mother of Aeneas. Mars, didn't mention it, sorry, the father of Romulus and Remus. So you've got a great divine pedigree coming into the Roman line, which is always very important for a city. And great works of art coming into Rome, often in triumphs. You have generals taking over this part of the Greek world, that part of the Greek world, and they come back to Rome laden with gold and silver and sculptures and paintings and furniture and slaves, and they parade them through the city of Rome. And everyone sees this amazing wealth, and not surprisingly, everyone wants a bit of it. You have sculptures, sometimes Greek originals. These 2 bronzes now in the Palazzo Massimo in Rome. Examples of great bronze work that's coming into Rome. And a familiar scene, the discobolus, the discus thrower. Notice our discus thrower in the British Museum, his head goes the other way. It looks forward. And these are the correct ones looking back. But there are numerous copies of these because not everyone could have the original. There was only one original and it was bronze. And therefore you want copies of it. And so workshops set up producing these copies. The one on the right is the best copy surviving, the Lancelotti, a discobolus named after the family that owned it in the Renaissance. So fine is it that it catches everyone's eye. And it caught the eye of somebody quite famous called Adolf Hitler. And he took it to Munich. And there it stayed until after the Second World War. Because art moves with power. It always has done, and it always will do. Art moves with power and with wealth. you've got an awful lot of change happening in the Roman Republic, social change, and huge wealth, and disparity of wealth, and desire of wealth. And before long, you have civil war. You have the state unable to cope with these great tensions between the Senate and the generals and the generals, the Senate and the people, the knights and the Senate. So you have this chaos in society. And it's this man, Julius Caesar, who becomes dictator perpetuus, dictator for life. And he stabilizes society for a while. And what does he do? He embarks on a huge building program. This is what you do. He puts his mark on the city of Rome, including the Forum of Julius Caesar. The Forum Romanum, the old center of town, is no longer able to cope with all the needs of Rome's great territories. So, an imperial forum, the Forum of Caesar, with at its center the Temple of Venus, very significant, his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Venus. And it's on the Temple of Venus that he receives a group from the Senate. The trouble is he doesn't get up when they arrive. There are ideas that he's going for a kind of kingship, and that is strengthened when he brings to Rome from Egypt this woman. There's only one Cleopatra. Yeah, there's only one. And she's a queen. She's the queen of Egypt. Who is the consort of a queen? A king. And what can you not be after the king's experience of Rome? You cannot be a king. And so the assassins get together. Ides of March, 44 BC, Caesar is assassinated under that bus. That's where the temporary Senate was meeting, at the back of Pompey's theatre, abutting those temples in Lago Argentina. When you go to the Forum and they say, and Caesar was assassinated here, he wasn't, because the Senate house in the Forum wasn't built when Caesar was assassinated. Little did the assassins know that by assassinating Caesar and bringing back the Republic, hooray, no, they didn't. They ushered in something very different. They ushered in the Principate, they ushered in the Empire, because this man, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, Octavian, soon to be Augustus, has far more powers than Caesar could ever have dreamed of. He's head of religion, as shown here. He's head of the army. He's head of state. He's first citizen. He's everything in one pair of hands. And there is a boom. All of the Roman world is under one ruler for the first time. Peace in many areas of the empire, prosperity, urban boom, both in ordinary things and spectacular things, like the Portland vase, like the black ass cameo, pottery to go on the tables. Everything is booming under the age of Augustus. He said, I found Rome a city of brick and I left it a city of marble. The brick was still there, but it was covered with marble. Here's the Forum Romanum, and here's a reconstruction by Alan Sorrell, and virtually every monument you can see, those great long basilicas that close the long sides, the temples, Temple of Julius Caesar, the Temple of Saturn, the Temple of Concord, they are all remodeled under Augustus. He changes everything in the city. The Senate house is finished by Augustus, so Caesar could not have been killed in it. Rome's first permanent theatre that is not a religious building. Caesar's great enemy, Pompey, had built a theatre, but he had to put a temple of Venus on it so that it wasn't deemed an effete Greek theatre. Augustus can build the first Greek theatre openly in Rome, the first Roman theatre, and it's the Theatre of Marcellus, named after his nephew, his sister Octavia's son. He died young, sadly, and it survived thanks to having apartments built on it in the Renaissance. So it wasn't torn to pieces for its building stone. He builds everywhere, including his own forum. He builds the Forum of Augustus. Here are the remains today, the remains of the temple of Mars Ultor, Mars the Avenger, avenging on the assassins of his father. Here's a reconstruction of what it looked like, beautiful white marble. Underneath the colonnades, hundreds of statues telling the story of his family, his ancestors. And along the top, the top of the arcade there, alternating images of caryatids showing I conquered Greece, and great roundels showing Jupiter Ammon, Zeus Ammon, the Egyptian Zeus. I conquered Egypt. Anyone going into the Forum of Augustus sees these images and knows what it means. He's in control. And if you went to the Circus Maximus, you'd see this obelisk brought from Egypt. Mighty Egypt is kneeling to Rome. You have this immense power of monuments. And of course, he builds his own tomb while he's still alive. He builds this great rotunda tomb covered with sculptures originally towering over the edge of the city. And the Mausoleum of Augustus had such a history. It was a fortress, it was a bear-baiting arena, it was a garden, and finally it became a theatre. It became the auditorium of Augustus in the 19th century. And there it is in course of demolition. It was demolished by this man, Mussolini, who wanted to liberate all of the Augustan monuments, in particular the mausoleum. And why did he want to liberate the mausoleum? Because he wanted to be buried there himself. He was the new Augustus, so where better to lay his head at the end of his days than in Augustus's tomb? Not everyone could be an Augustus, and the emperors that follow build different things in different ways. Here's Claudius. I finished watching the series again quite recently. Still one of the best things on television. And Claudius, here in the Vatican museums in the 40s AD, built practical things, useful things. He built a great port for deep water ships in Ostia, in Portus, north of Ostia. And he very importantly brought 2 new aqueducts to the city, the Aqua Nuova and the Aqua Claudia. And here is the Porta Maggiore in the south of the city. Yes, it's a nice ornamental gate, but it's also an aqueduct flyover. 2 aqueducts go over the top of it on their way into the city, with big inscriptions telling you who did it, who built it. And the aqueducts are amazing, aren't they? If you think that ancient Rome was receiving 300 million gallons of water a day. It was one of the most watered cities in the history of the world. And here's one of Sorrell's drawings showing those aqueducts snaking their way through the Roman countryside, sometimes for 20 or 30 kilometers. Incredible feats of architecture and engineering. And when you go to Rome today, you go to the Trevi, if you can get near the Trevi now, and at the Trevi fountain, you will see fountains that are powered by a Roman aqueduct. This is the Aqua Virgo, the Aqua Vergine, which was repaired in the Middle Ages and still supplies water for the Trevi fountain and for Piazza Navona and for the fountain in front of the Pantheon. And so, little did Anita Ekberg know, as she frolicked in the water, that she was frolicking in Roman water. Actually, she did that now, she'd probably be arrested. So, the dynasty of Augustus ends sadly with Nero. And following him, there is a period of chaos from which emerge these people, the Flavians. They were farmers turned tax farmers turned generals. And on the left, I can't do left and right. On the left, you have Vespasian, and on the right, you have Titus. There was another son, Domitian. Vespasian took part in the invasion of Britain very successfully. And together, they put down the Jewish revolt very brutally and savagely in the 70s AD. And with the money, they built. This was an arch built to honor Vespasian and Titus, and it still sits at the entrance to the Forum Romanum, and on the inside you can see sculpture showing the triumpha, showing the triumph that they held when they came back from Judea, when they came back from the sack of Jerusalem. And you can see very clearly, top left, the menorah, the 7-branch candlestick from the temple at Jerusalem. And This was deposited in Vespasian's forum, the Forum of Peace. Now, the Forum of Peace wasn't like Caesar's and Augustus's. It wasn't for commerce and banking and organization and administration. It was a museum. It was a place for contemplation and beauty. He filled it with statues taken back from Nero's golden palace that he had nicked from Greece. And he puts them back in the people, not the Greek people, the Roman people, because they don't belong to the Greek people anymore. They belong to the Roman people now. And he spreads them over this great forum. And the Forum of Peace, well, couldn't have been more different from the other thing they did with the money, which was to build this, the Colosseum. It wasn't called the Colosseum. It was never called the Colosseum in the ancient world. It was called the Amphitheatrum Flavium, after the Flavian family. And this underlines why they do this. Because you are providing a building that people need. Spectacular entertainment. It is an amazing building. It actually beautifies the city, but it's got your name on it. And that is so important. Your name is on it. And let's just think of the mechanics of it. There were 5,000 pairs of gladiators who fought at the beginning. It only took 10 years to build. HS2 could take a lesson or two. There were 9,000 animals killed in the games that opened it. But more than that, think of the impact of this building. At the end of the Roman Forum, you have a building seating 60,000 people. 60,000 people coming and going. They need feeding, they need watering, they need toilets. There are animals and people coming and going, live and dead. There is sound, there is vibration, there is smell. The smells coming from this building must have been extraordinary. And Deloitte did an interesting exercise. They put social value on monuments across the world. This is what people would pay to look after the monument, not what you get from ticket entry or anything like that. What did people rate it as? And the Colosseum came in at 77 billion euros. The Sydney Opera House, God bless them, came in at only 8 billion euros. An interesting sight. And ancient Romans would have thought just the same. The Colosseum was much, much more than the arena. It was a part of their city. It was a part of their Romanness, their Romanitas. And that's why these monuments were so important. A reconstruction there on show day. You've got the velarium, the great awnings being hoisted by trained sailors who had a barracks nearby. You've got 60,000 people. And then, of course, you've got what they came to see, the gladiators. And soon, of course, Gladiator 2. I must say, I went to Gladiator 1 with Ralph Jackson and others of the Romans, and it was a wonderful film. This was 2000. And when we came out, there was some of the press, and they were saying, oh, you're from the British Museum. Oh, don't you think it's a little bit, and you know, the armour and the weapons, they look a bit bad, don't they? And Amir Ralph just said, no, it was wonderful. It was fantastic. Anything that allows people to share the joys that we have. We're so privileged. We swim in this sea of Romanness. Anything that brings people into that is good. So go and see it. And recently they excavated things are going on in Rome all the time. I can't begin to tell you everything that's happening, but near the Colosseum, they excavated to show what happened after it was abandoned and how it gradually fell down or was pulled down. So excavations going on all the time about the building, about the destruction, about the use of Rome's monuments. The last of the Flavians, not nearly as successful as his brother and his father, Domitian. He built, oh my heavens, he built the great palace up on the Palatine Hill. He built this structure. This is Piazza Navona. Originally, it was a stadium for Greek naked athletics. Now, in the Middle Ages, it became a great piazza. The buildings following the lines of the seating, so you can still see it in these aerial views. And he built his own forum. This is the Forum of Domitian, except it was never called that. It was called the Forum of Trajan, Forum of Nerva, because Nerva is the emperor that followed Domitian, and Domitian was damned. The Senate damned his name. Damnatio memoria is what we call it nowadays. All his statues lost their heads. The inscriptions were carved out. Official documents were burned. He ceased to exist. In Stalinist era, he was a non-person. And so it became the Forum of Nerva. But it was actually the Forum of Domitian. Trajan is the man who follows Nerva, and he is the start of a new era because Nerva adopts him. He wasn't his son, he adopts him. And this leads us through the 2nd century emperors, the adopted emperors, and it's a golden age. The empire is at its greatest extent, it's vaguely peaceful, and you have, most importantly, peace at the center. Trajan wasn't Italian. He was the first non-Italian emperor, Spanish, in fact. And so popular was he with the Senate, so loved was he for his clever way of dealing with people, is dealing with the Senate, respecting the Senate whilst taking all the important decisions himself, but nonetheless allowing the Senate to think that they were taking important decisions and getting on with people and being a good general. After he died, every subsequent emperor was inducted into the Senate with a decree, may you be felicior Augusto and melior Traiano. May you be more blessed than Augustus and greater than Trajan. Some hope. But this was what he was said. And Trajan takes the empire to its greatest extent. He conquers Romania. He conquers Iraq. And with the gold from Romania, he comes back and he builds the Forum of Trajan. This is perhaps the most famous element still remaining, the great column of Trajan, and the markets. Because as part of the huge complex, there was a forum, great market square, then a great square, then the basilica, not for religion, but for law giving and administration, and then these huge administrative buildings, markets, whatever they were, 5 stories of them, quite extraordinary. When you see a reconstruction of the main piazza of the Forum of Trajan, it is quite extraordinary. And those of you who know Rome, Piazza Venezia would fit inside that piazza. It is that big. And all around, beautiful carvings, sculpture everywhere. It's not enough to be a functional square. It has to look gorgeous. And the great statue of Trajan in the middle of it, the equestrian statue. I mean, it was used for loads of things. Hadrian burnt debts very publicly in the square. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius auctioned imperial goods to pay for his wars. So it's a used square. People come and use it. The square itself was called a monument, the whole complex was called a monument unique under heaven by a late Roman writer, a Christian writer who had no love for pagans. This was a monument unique under heaven. An emperor came from Byzantium and took a shine to the great horse, Trajan's horse. And he said, oh, I quite like that horse. And a courtier said, my lord, before you have a horse like that, you've got to have a stable like this. So the horse stayed in Rome. And he rebuilt the Circus Maximus, one of Sorel's greatest drawings. And the Circus Maximus was the largest spectacular entertainment venue in the whole of the Roman world. If the Colosseum could house 60,000 people, this could house around 180,000 people, 3 times the Colosseum. Now, I saw an interesting fact that Taylor Swift had a concert in Seattle, at which there were 144,000 people. And at one point, they were encouraged to jump up and down. And they created an earthquake that registered 2 on the Richter scale. I wonder what would have happened if the 180,000 people had all jumped up and down for the same horse. But imagine the noise, imagine the sound coming from this. And all the time you are reminded that you are part of this. This is your city with your monuments. It's a very powerful, powerful drug. And of course, you came here to watch the Formula One, the quadriga. This is a terracotta plaque here in the BM showing a 4-horse chariot. And this was where the money was. This was where the big race money was won. And the charioteers who raced these chariots could become phenomenally wealthy, hugely wealthy. And of course, they would have been as famous to the Romans as this charioteer is to us. Every bit. And Trajan adopts his successor, Hadrian, the Emperor Hadrian. Some of you remember the wonderful exhibition by Torsten Opper here in the round reading room in the noughties on the Emperor Hadrian. Fantastic exhibition. And he is a builder par excellence. He travels around the empire building and the city of Rome. He builds phenomenally. The Pantheon, simply my favorite building. Simple, erect, severe, austere, sublime, shrine of all saints and temple of all gods, from Jove to Jesus, spared and blessed by time. Thank you, Lord Byron. And it's built by angels, not men, Michelangelo. And who could disagree? You see the Pantheon, and then you go inside the Pantheon and you see this. And immediately you've got a sense of harmony, you've got a sense of beauty. And it's not surprising because there is harmony. The width of the dome is the same as the height of the dome, exactly 43 meters, about 142 feet. And by the way, the Statue of Liberty could hide in the Pantheon. Only her torch would stick out the top through that oculus, that deliberate hole, which weakens, which takes the weight at the top of the dome without weakening it. Because of course it's all concrete. It's the magic of concrete that allows this to be built. And the great Bath buildings, it's this concrete that the Romans mastered so well. And we've got some bits of the Pantheon in the British Museum. And yes, we were allowed to take them because a pope in the 18th century decided to strip out that first floor of decoration because it didn't look right. So he stripped it out, and the agents of the British Museum managed to salvage 6 of these. And of course, the dome of the Pantheon has influenced so much. You look at Brunelleschi's dome, the dome of St. Peter's, and of course, our own dome here. It's influenced directly by the Pantheon. And he doesn't just build that, he builds this. The temple of Venus and Rome, unique in the city of Rome, with its double cella. Venus faces the Colosseum and Rome faces into the Forum. And it was enormous, gigantic. Standing on the right is the Colossus, which gave the Colosseum its name. But it wasn't standing there originally. It was standing where the top of the temple is, because that was originally part of Nero's golden house. And the Colossus stood in the vestibule area of the house. So Hadrian wanted the space, and he moved the statue with 24 elephants. And he had help, of course, in designing it, because his father's architect, Apollodorus of Damascus, who built Trajan's Forum, who probably started the Pantheon, which is Trajan's building, really, not Hadrian's. And we know that they worked together, well, that's probably an overstatement. They worked together on the Temple of Venus and Rome, but they fell out. They fell out terribly because Apollodorus of Damascus laughed at the design and said, if the goddesses stand up, they bang their heads on the roof. That wasn't a wise thing to say to a ruling emperor. Say it when he's prince and you've still got Trajan to run to, but don't say it when he's emperor. Apollodorus is banished and some say killed by Hadrian. This was the importance of his architecture to him. But the Temple of Venus and Rome is one of the lesser known, perhaps, glories of Hadrian, and of course this. The Castel Sant'Angelo, as we say now, but the mausoleum of Augustus, deliberately smaller than the mausoleum of Hadrian, deliberately smaller than the mausoleum of Augustus by about 3 meters, because Augustus had, Hadrian, right, take some water, Paul. That's better. Because Hadrian had great respect for Augustus, and so his mausoleum is a little bit smaller. And here it is at the Girandola, Saints Peter and Paul Day in June, or Easter. You have these amazing firework displays. And these have gone on since the Middle Ages. And it gives a sense of how these monuments can mean different things to different people at different times. The last happy emperor of this golden age, Marcus Aurelius, seen here on his wonderful bronze horse. There would have been dozens of these equestrian monuments in ancient Rome. Only this one survives, the only one. And it probably survived because they thought it was Constantine, the so-called Christian emperor. And so it sat outside the palace at the Lateran, the Pope's palace, and survived to the present day. He makes the mistake of letting his idiot son become emperor instead of adopting. And that's Commodus, and that's the baddie in the first film of Gladiator. And it doesn't end well. And there's chaos. And it's this man, Septimius Severus, who saves the empire from that chaos. Shown here on a very rare survival, a wooden roundel now in Berlin, originally from Egypt, showing Septimius, his Syrian wife, and their two sons, Caracalla and Gita. But wait a minute, you say there's only one son. Yes. Damnatio has happened again. Septimius builds. There have been fires in Rome because of these awful civil wars, and so he builds. He builds a lot. The Pantheon has Septimius's name on it. He also puts this amazing thing into the Forum of Peace. He creates an archive and puts the marble Forma Urbis, the map of the city, onto one of the walls. And fragments of that survive today. And there's now a purpose-built museum of the Forma Urbis. And it's a cautionary tale when you write books about Rome, because the first time I went out to Rome after I'd written my book, I could have torn up 4 entries. I can't tell you which ones. But this, the museum opened in between my submitting the book and getting it back. And so this, you can actually see the fragments of marble that have survived set into a map of the city. And there, by the way, is the Teatrum Marcelli. That is the theatre of Marcellus, shown on the marble Forma Urbis. And it shows ordinary houses, tenement blocks, warehouses. It's an incredible, incredible feat. And as I mentioned, there were 2 brothers, Caracalla and Gita. Oh, by the way, they are the emperors in the new film of Gladiator, Caracalla and Gita. They don't survive long together because Caracalla kills Gita. Some say in his mother's arms. Septimius may well have started this building, but it's Caracalla who largely completes it. The great baths, one of the largest of the imperial baths, which was a bit of luxury that everyone could enjoy. From poor people to senators, you'd all go to the baths. And entry was low, so you could, and the number of people, probably 6,000-7,000 people a day could pass through these baths. And just think, by the way, what that involves for the running of it, the slaves. Because every single monument I've shown you is run, operated by slaves. They underpinned every Roman activity, an uncomfortable reality for us today. The great baths of Caracalla, huge complex, not only baths, but shops, offices, libraries, all of the different amenities. This is the remains of the great cold room, the frigidarium of the great baths of Caracalla. And here is a small element of reconstruction, giving you the marble floors and the beautiful decoration. We have part of the baths of Caracalla in the British Museum. It's a toilet. A toilet. Thinking of things going down the pan, Caracalla kills his brother. He is assassinated by the following emperor. He's assassinated, and he's assassinated. And that leads us into a downward spiral that is known as the 3rd century crisis. Warring emperors, warring armies, depleted frontiers, barbarian invasions, inflation, plague, you name it. The 3rd century has it in spades. The empire will survive, but only just, and it emerges very different. And even the eternal city needs walls. The Emperor Aurelian builds walls around the city of Rome because barbarians came to within 3 days' march of the ancient city of Rome. And so walls are built around the city. It's not until about 300 AD that an emperor emerges, Diocletian, who with his colleagues stabilizes the situation again. And even he can't keep the empire as one unit. So, as shown here, these very famous sculptures from St. Mark's, originally from Constantinople, the emperor on the left of the two at the front is probably Diocletian. And he sets up a system called the Tetrarchy, with 2 Augustuses, one in the west, one in the east, and 2 Caesars, one in the west, one in the east. And together they will rule the empire. That's great, provided everyone gets on. Guess what happens next? Diocletian builds. He builds the greatest baths, even greater than the baths of Caracalla, the baths of Diocletian. These are still visible near Termini Station in Rome, in the centre north of the city. And when you look at the baths of Diocletian, they're incredible structures. They're huge, they're vast, and they're what happened to them after the Roman Empire is almost as interesting as their function during it. Everything from an oil store to a prison to a cafe to a hotel to a planetarium took place in the baths of Diocletian. And as Elisa said, Michelangelo took the Frigidarium and made it into the Church of Santa Maria degli Angeli. And indeed, the basilica, these great aisled halls, which you get in the bath buildings and in the basilicas, the Roman basilicas, are perfect for Christian worship because you need as many people as possible to see the action that's happening within the church. In a pagan temple, all the action happens outside at the altar, which is outside the temple. For the Christian church, you need visibility, great open spaces, and so these are perfect. There is a last hurrah in Rome in the early 4th century. You have an emperor called Maxentius, and he builds this great basilica, and soaring 120 feet high. Here's a reconstruction of what it would have looked like. 6 mighty columns of Turkish marble. Each is 15 meters high and weighs 90 tons. Just getting one of them through the narrow streets of Rome would have been a feat. But imagine all of it coming through the city. Just building one of these imperial buildings was a great statement. And of course, what this does, Maxentius says, I am Roman. I have faith in Rome. I will stick with you. And so he builds. And Rome, again, caput mundi. But not for long, because Maxentius in 312 is defeated by this man, Constantine. In the great basilica Maxentius, they were looking for stone in the 15th century, and they found the fragments of a huge statue, this statue, now in the courtyard of the Capitoline Museums. It's Constantine. Why is it Constantine? Because as soon as he'd beaten Maxentius in north of Rome, he came into the basilica, knocked the head off Maxentius' statue and put his own instead. It's Constantine's city now, and it's Constantine's empire. And we will see changes. By the way, Factum, the organization Factum, recreated the sculpture. There it is. Look at the scale. Look at the average sized woman standing by the side. And there were many sculptures like this in Rome, many. He builds a great arch, one of the last secular arches in Rome, commemorating his defeat of Maxentius. And he builds very significantly the church of San Giovanni in Laterano, the first Christian church of any scale built within the walls of Rome. Where does he build it? He builds it slap bang on the site of the barracks of the troops that had remained loyal to Maxentius. That's gone, and he builds the church on the top. And this is the Cathedral of Rome, not the Vatican. The Cathedral of Rome is San Giovanni Laterano, St. John Lateran. And underneath St. John Lateran, recent excavations have revealed not only the barracks that were flattened, but the houses that were flattened to build the barracks. So you've got these wonderful layers in Rome. And of course, it's Jubileo year next year, it's Jubilee year, and in front of San Giovanni Laterano they're digging, and what have they found? They found the remains of the early palace of the popes. So all the time there are these amazing excavations going on, revealing more and more of this incredible layer cake. Now, 313, Constantine issues the Edict of Milan, tolerance for Christianity. Within 30 years, it's preference for Christianity, and within 70 years, it's no alternative to Christianity. One of the great rooms of Raphael in the Vatican has this on its ceiling, the triumph of the cross, the statue of Mercury shattered underneath. And the pagan temples are closed in 391 AD. Only 20 years later, the city of Rome is sacked. Eternal Rome is sacked by the barbarians, the Visigoths of Alaric. And I don't know whether they wasted their time bringing down statues like this, but nonetheless, it makes a great picture, Sylvestre. And by the time that this monument is built in Rome, the column of Phocas in the Forum, it's the last monument in the Forum. By the time, in 609 AD, by the time this is built, the Forum's in ruins. There is no Senate. There's no Senate anymore. There's no Western Empire, no Western Emperor. Things have really changed. Rome, huge areas of Rome are abandoned. People have taken refuge in the historic center by the great monuments, building their huts under the great temples and basilicas. The population of Rome plummets from 1.5 million under Constantine to around about 40 to 50,000 people. You can't maintain a city like that, and they don't. There is the Forum of Nerva, Domitian, as it was in the 2nd century AD. Here's how it was in the 9th century AD. Rome has become a series of villages. Most of it's agricultural. Those buildings surviving are turned into churches. The Senate House is the Church of St. Hadrian. The Pantheon is the Church of Santa Maria. And you have this process of decay and destruction. There are some bright moments. The Renaissance ought to be a bright moment because you've got the rediscovery of Roman art, Roman sculpture. And of course, this man, Raphael, one of the leading lights of the Renaissance, buried in the Pantheon. Where else would he be buried? This great symbol of Romanness. And he was actually the curator of the ancient monuments of Rome for the Pope. He looked after, as much as possible, the ancient monuments. But, of course, everything has changed. And what matters now are the Christian churches and, of course, St. Peter's, the Vatican. Between 1500 and 1620, the new St. Peter's is built. And in the 1530s, a fatal edict was given to the Fabbrica di San Pietro, the group organizing the procurement of materials. They could take anything they wanted, and they did. Anything that was standing was demolished. This is the little Temple of Vesta in the Forum. It was complete. It had fallen over, but it was complete. It goes into the lime kilns in the space of about 6 months. These are the shattered remains reconstructed in the period of Mussolini. In the Great Baths, these are ransacked by people for sculptures and building materials. Baths of Caracalla by the Farnese family. They discover things like the wonderful Farnese Hercules. And then, to Rome's disgust, they take their collection down to Naples. And it's in the Naples Museum now, you can see it. It's not just the grand things either, because all over the ceilings, you had glass tesserae. And guess what? There was a trade in glass tesserae, selling it to the cathedral makers of Western Europe. When you go into cathedrals with these beautiful stained glass windows, you're looking through Roman glass, especially the blue. Even the Pantheon wasn't spared, because if you'd walked into the porch of the Pantheon and looked up, you'd have seen a great coffered bronze ceiling. And that was melted down to make cannons for Castel Sant'Angelo. There was a common saying that what the barbarians didn't do, the Barberini did. And by the time Goethe, the wonderful polymath, arrives in Rome in 1800, most of ancient Rome is under farmland, with some monuments sticking up, the Colosseum here covered in vegetation, so much of what was there now gone. And the fascinating thing is that however much destruction there was, however much things had been pulled to pieces and destroyed, the myth of Rome was still there, the legend of Rome, the power of Rome. This man, Bede, up in Jarrow, in northern England, in 700 AD, writes down, "While the Colosseum shall stand, Rome shall stand. When the Colosseum falls, Rome shall fall. And when Rome falls, then falls the world." Well, fortunately for the world, for us, and for Deloitte's, it stands. Thank you.
A big applause. You can see it. Success. I think you're more famous than the charioteer now. You know, you're the Formula One of the British Museum. So it's question time now after this amazing talk. If you are in the room, as I can already see people doing, please do raise your hand. And if you could kindly wait until the microphone gets to you before you speak. If you are joining us from Zoom, just a reminder that you can use the Q&A button to ask questions. Shall we start from the gentleman here? I think he was super fast.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. Right at the end, you mentioned the population of Rome. And I'm interested to know whether, as well as these monuments, emperors put in the infrastructure necessary to sustain that sort of population, all the people coming in to watch the races and so forth. I mean, things like, shops, supplies of water, latrines, if I may say so. Didn't that also have to go alongside these sort of vast buildings?
You mean Rome in its peak, when that huge population? Yes, absolutely. The most important thing was to make sure that you had food and water to feed people. But, for example, the Emperor Hadrian has a program of building tenements along the main north-south road, now the Via Corso. You have emperors involved in town planning. The Emperor Nero, after the Great Fire of Rome, really overhauls much of the city and broadens the streets and things like that. So you do have attention to the infrastructure. You have development of the river ports that need to bring the goods up. And in terms of the infrastructure, you have a whole series of laws being passed. So clearly the emperors are paying attention to the minutiae. They don't necessarily build everything themselves, but they try and ensure that there are enough places to live in and places to buy your food and things like that. I don't know if that answers the question. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So we shall go to Zoom now, and we do have a question. Was it Hadrian who built the Pantheon, or was it Trajan?
It was Trajan. The interesting thing is that Hadrian finishes the Pantheon. He doesn't put his name on it. He puts the name of the man who built the original Pantheon. There was another Pantheon on the site, and that was Agrippa. That was Augustus's right-hand man, his son-in-law. But Hadrian finishes the Pantheon, certainly. It's during his reign that it's finished. But there's a wonderful tool that we can use for the buildings of ancient Rome, and those are the brick stamps. And they are stamps that were put on to the bricks in the figlini, in the tileries, and they are very accurate. And of course, it's possible that some stamps could be reused, that there are some old bricks, but when you find the whole pretty much part of one wall, and the whole of that wall are stamps of Trajan, then you do begin to wonder whether it wasn't actually Trajan that built it. My opinion is that most of the Pantheon would have been built under Trajan, but that it's certainly finished in the reign of Hadrian. Yeah.
Thank you, very clear. Shall we go to the room again? I see a hand raised at the very back with the pink sweater.
Hi, you said Caracalla built baths and then the next emperor built baths, or so-and-so built a forum and then someone else built a forum. Were the old ones still used or were they replacement?
Very good question. Were the old forums still used when they built the new ones? Were the baths still used when they built the new ones? The answer is yes, they were. When the Pantheon was built under Trajan and Hadrian, it was replacing the old Pantheon, which had probably been destroyed by fire. And fire and flood were the two reasons why buildings would be rebuilt. But otherwise, we know for a fact that people had, do get that, it might be important. We do know that people had their favourite baths, and so they would go to the baths of Nero or the baths of Agrippa, even though the baths of Caracalla were already there. These baths carry on being used, and so you have this amazing spread of amenities and choice. You can choose to go to one of the big and rather vulgar ones, or you can go to your homely one that doesn't have all the facilities, but it's the one that you're used to. So I think you do have this incredible spread of amenities for people. And the forums, certainly, we know that the imperial forums carry on being used alongside the Forum Romanum right until the end of imperial Rome, into the 5th century AD. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. I see a gentleman here. Sorry, exercise for the colleagues with the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I guess I was wondering, as you've uncovered so much about Rome throughout your sort of career, as you look forward and think about the mysteries that still sit within it and the areas we don't understand, what are your sort of passions or your next research projects within the context of this empire?
Within the context of this empire, gosh.
Or this city?
I just want to try and keep abreast of what's going on in it, I think, because so much is happening in Rome. As I say, I wasn't joking when I could have torn up not torn up, but amended carefully 3 of my entries after one visit to Rome. I can think of 3 or 4 new museums that have opened in the past year. So it's really to try and go to Rome as often as possible, but also to keep on trying to make sense of it for people. Because, for example, I work now in the Ashmolean, and we are in the course of redoing our Rome gallery. And what I want to do with that gallery is to make the Romans seem closer to us, because all these buildings, and even the table pottery and the bronze statuettes, they're all part of the same thing. They're all part of Romanitas. They all link up. And I think if I can just spend the rest of my time having the luxury of being able to go to Rome and then coming back, spreading the word about it and telling people how amazing it is, then I'll be very happy.
Huge applause. Thank you so much. So, that was absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much again for the amazing talk. Now, if you are on site, I would like to invite you to the drinks reception in the foyer right outside the theater, where you can exchange your token for a complimentary drink. Something extremely important: Paul has very kindly agreed to sign copies of the new book, Ancient Rome in 50 Monuments, which you can purchase for the special members price of £20. Now, you will need cash to do so, but there is a cash machine located in the Great Court. So don't worry, you have the possibility to have the cash. If you have joined us from Zoom, we hope you have a wonderful evening and to see you again soon. Goodbye and take care, everybody. And thank you, Paul, again.